Welcome to Heads Up, the ISC Research series that keeps you informed of the latest trends happening in the international schools market. Let's get started with our episode.
Hello, and a very warm welcome to ISC Research's webinar today, addressing the challenge of recruitment and staff development in international schools. Now, various factors have significantly impacted the recruitment of international school staff over the past 2 years. The COVID pandemic has, of course, been pivotal, but also a variety of geopolitical factors have played a major part. ISC Research has recently been investigating the challenges and opportunities in international school teacher recruitment. And to this end, we've surveyed a wide range of schools and specialist recruitment companies. We've also talked to continued professional development experts within the international schools market, and the results of this research have just been published in a report, Recruitment and CPD in International Schools. The report is available now on our website or via our data platform, ISC Insights, if you have a subscription to that. The report looks at international school recruitment trends and market shifts and offers advice from experienced recruiters. It also looks at how CPD is becoming increasingly central to addressing recruitment and retention challenges, how its traditional function of upskilling existing staff has been impacted by the COVID pandemic, and what the future of CPD and recruitment may look like in international schools. International School Services, often known as ISS, kindly sponsored this report. For the past 66 years, ISS has provided a broad range of services to international schools, from teacher and head recruitment to school startup and management, school supplies, finance and foundation support, and professional learning. ISS are also sponsoring this webinar today, which aims to look at the shifts occurring within the recruitment sector in the international schools market, and look also at how CPD can be a key factor in responding to growing recruitment and retention challenges for many schools. To that end, I'm delighted to introduce our esteemed panel of experts joining me today, all of whom contributed to the report. Let me begin with Pauline O'Brien. Pauline is Director of Global Recruitment at International School Services, where her main focus is coaching and mentoring school leaders and teachers on all matters recruitment. Pauline's also known for her extensive work developing inclusive, aspiring leadership programs and with women in leadership in education. Dr. Vincent Chian is Principal of Fairview International School, Malaysia, and joins us today to offer an international school's point of view on all things recruitment and CPD. Vincent has over 15 years' experience working in international schools and designing recruitment and professional development strategies. We're also joined by Dr. Marianne Yong-Macdonald. Marianne is the Group Head of Teacher Professional Learning at International Schools Partnership. ISP has 56 schools located across the globe, and Marianne brings over 20 years of international school experience and a really valuable group perspective on CPD to the discussion today. And Dr. Siobhan Mellor is a HCPC registered chartered educational psychologist and director of Real Group, which provides e-learning, educational services and training, all powered by education psychology to schools worldwide. Siobhan's been working as an educational psychologist in schools for over 25 years and previously as a primary teacher in the UK. So without further ado, I'd like to kick off our panel with a question to you, Pauline. Really, can you set the scene for us? Can you tell us about some of the new recruitment trends that you've been seeing at ISS this year?
Thanks, Nalini. Welcome, everybody. It's a pleasure to join you on this panel today. We've seen a lot, so I'm going to try and summarize for everyone just the highlights that could be of interest. At the start of the pandemic, we saw that leaders and teachers actually who were potentially thinking about moving on actually didn't. They stayed in their schools to, and they extended their contracts potentially by a year or two to make sure that they could support their schools going through this pandemic. We've seen, of course, that a lot of people have not been free to travel out of country, and they haven't, they haven't been able to be close to their loved ones in up to 3 years in some cases, and this is particularly true of China. And so we're seeing at this point in time that people are moving out of China and Asia. We've seen more in-country hiring, particularly in Asia, where visa restrictions have been an escalating problem. We see that leaders and teachers are moving from school to school in country. And this has actually offered some opportunities for people to move up this career ladder, for people who are qualified and credentialed, without actually giving schools the issues of travel or entry difficulties. We've seen teachers and leaders become more comfortable with online hiring, using multiple platforms to do so. And while we continue to get the feedback that in-person hiring is preferable, everybody has absolutely moved and adapted and innovated in terms of making the best of online opportunities and hiring. I think I'd also say that the recruitment season has become year-round, whereas we might have had a portion of the year before where people would have said this is the recruitment season. We see it's all round, moving for people making contacts and always having talent available and connections available in case they require in hiring during a year, for instance. So it's no longer just focused on one season. We're seeing that the role requirements are being adapted as well for teachers and leaders in the current climate. Resilience, flexibility, and ability to deal with ambiguity is rising to the top of the list. An example of flexibility required is being able to deal with a hybrid model in person and online, and potentially across multiple time zones. We're seeing a different focus on compensation packages, health insurance rising in the list as one of the most important considerations, and what health provisions are available in country where someone is applying. And we're seeing everyone develop COVID skills, we're calling it. We've been working with candidates to unpack this so that they can outline what this actually means. Many teachers' professional growth has been enormous in the short period of time due to sheer need. School leaders have reported to us increased skills in teachers, and them actually recognizing talent in some of their teachers that they didn't realize before, because people have had to develop their skills to provide online schooling for students. And they've, particularly in early years, school leaders report, seeing extreme creative talents in teachers around the world in engaging our youngest learners. And I think also speaking to teachers and leaders, everyone's being a bit more considered in terms of where they'll apply for their next position, due to the mobility restrictions. Whereas we might have been freer in the past to say, oh, let's just give that a go. People are really being considered in terms of, can I get back to my loved ones? Can I be close to my loved ones and travel back home at least once a year? And otherwise, I must say, it has also been a lot of business as usual. If I look at our teacher hiring and so on, it has not decreased. Our leadership recruitment has not decreased. So a lot of it has been business as usual, albeit online. Does that kind of cover, Nalini?
That's wonderful. There are a lot of points there, but I think it's really important. We're certainly seeing the same in our research. Vincent, I'm interested to come to you. You're a head of a school, to know really. Pauline talked there about the new skills that teachers need, that perhaps schools are looking for at the moment. Certainly in the report, you shared your strategic approach that the school takes to CPD and how that fits directly with your recruitment strategy. Why is CPD and why are those skills, so important, and how do they affect effective recruitment, in your opinion?
Thanks, Nalini. I'll try and keep this as short as I can, but that's a long answer. So we're an IB school, And when we started out about 15 years ago, there really wasn't very much talent that we could really tap on. And talent was difficult for IB teachers. You know, to find an experienced IB teachers, you'd have to pay a premium every time. And the other thing we were thinking about is we hired a couple of IB teachers, but it was always a bit of a hit and miss. You know, we eventually came to the conclusion that the traditional methods that we used to recruit teachers had a major flaw. Who doesn't embellish the truth on an interview? Who doesn't select only their best recommendations to share with future employers? The traditional strategy of recruiting teachers at fairs and doing interviews has that problem. People always want to show their best side, so you really can't tell, do they really have the goods or not? And we came to the conclusion, the only way that you really knew that your workforce, your talent in that school had the capability is if you saw them on the job or you trained it right into them. So we embarked on a slightly different kind of approach. Instead of hiring in experienced teacher, we started training all of our teachers to get them to that point. And we wanted to do this really strategically. So we have two ways. One, we had tertiary level programs offered to all of our teachers through our sister organization, University College Fairview. So they were doing things like bachelor's and postgraduate diplomas and masters and PhDs in education. Of course, because of our link with the IB, these are all IB certificated. Or they received this IB certificate in teaching and learning because we had some links with them. And then, of course, we had some differentiated approaches for programs and individuals and subjects, where, of course, we had the whole self-paced learning, the departments, CPDs, and so on and so forth. But really importantly, because we were training all of our teachers, there's an old teacher phrase that I learned when I first taught: if you don't assess it, it's not going to get learned, because kids don't take you seriously. And I still remember that from my first teacher mentor. And so we assess all of our teachers. When I teach you about inquiry, I'm going to have to watch you do it. If you can't do it, then I don't know whether you got it or not. And that's really it. And because we trained all of our teachers, we also knew where everybody was at any point in time. We built a matrix, we built a talent map, and we told ourselves, like, we knew where our dark spots were as a result of talent mapping. And from the talent mapping, we made CPD decisions about where to apply ourselves with regards to the differentiated approach. And of course, where we were truly lacking in expertise and where we desperately needed to pull in external talent. We perfected this to the point that we know that 90% of our fresh graduates, and I literally mean we were dragging in fresh graduates, they were able to achieve the IB standard in 19 months of hard training. And we came down to that sort of consistency and expectation. And so we just hired extra, and we built this pipeline of talent so we never ran out. And nowadays we rarely have to parachute in experienced talent anymore because we are ready for it. Even when the pandemic hit, because we were training all of our teachers, we weren't really reliant on the expatriate population jumping in and out of the country. Yeah, so that's our recruitment and CPD strategy and how they really link together.
Thanks. It's really interesting and quite an undertaking as a standalone school as well. Be interested to hear more about that later on. But let me come to you quickly, Marianne, because you're coming at this from a group point of view. You know, ISP contributed and highlighted some of the ways that your schools gain from a collective approach to CPD and how that impacts recruitment. Can you tell us a little bit more about ISP's approach to CPD and how you address, you know, everybody's varied professional development needs across such a wide variety of schools and locations?
Well, first off, I just wanted to say, I do agree with, Vincent about building pipelines, right? Like, we're building a pipeline of leaders as well as a teacher pathway so that we are not always going outside looking for experienced teachers. So very much so in agreement with that one. And then to answer your question, what is our approach? First and foremost, the most important, it's about listening to our school leaders and our teachers, right? Like, that's the danger of being in a group. You're so big and you design something, but if you're not listening to your schools, you're not evidence-based, you're not focused on the data, then your professional development is not relevant because all the schools have their own identity. So that's number one for us. And then also being strategic and holistic, knowing that we all know that just workshops alone or professional development doesn't mean that transfer happens in the classroom, right? Because that's only one component. So we think about the other structures, what are the motivational factors that we're addressing? Are teachers having the time to learn? Are they given the pace, the type of courses they need? Do they have opportunities to learn on the job? And that's a key one. Actually, that's the big approach that we're using, on the job learning, because that's the best way to cascade in big groups, right? Also, we wonder about, do our schools have established leadership for learning cultures? Because this is what's going to drive everybody learning all the time together, and it's in the conversations that they have. As a matter of fact, I just came off a webinar earlier that I was hosting for the final group of participants from middle leadership. One of the things they talk about was the learning they learn from each other. So the learning conversation. So that's really an important one. Having said that, I don't want to just talk about, listening and being evidence-based, but I also think the pandemic has posed some challenges for us as a big group. We're not doing in-person anymore. We're doing all virtual. And we have been developing our learning hub, which is a platform, an online learning platform for all our community, where they can take self-paced courses. And these are interactive courses. They get badges. So then we all know that one of the biggest challenges for our teachers is time, right? Because they have to find time to teach, to plan, to have meetings with parents, students. And the last thing they think about sometimes is themselves and their own learning. So we have to design something where they're bite-sized micro-learning courses that they can go on anytime, whenever they can, and it's interesting for them. Right. So that's another approach that we've taken. So we have quite a few courses now on our Learning Hub, and teachers are accessing all over the world. And on this Learning Hub as well, we are trying to create communities of practice, because we have 56 schools across the globe, right? How wonderful it is to be learning and sharing. They might be an IB school, so maybe IB teachers, they might be in finance, we have admissions programs going on right now. So these things are also possible because of that platform. But not only that, we found that with the challenges of the pandemic, right, our face-to-face PD is now virtual blended programs. And, instead of looking at the glass half empty, glass half full, which means that how can we extend the learning and make it really effective and harness on the benefits of online learning? So we have now developed 8 weeks or 10 weeks or 12 weeks program, because it's extended, and coaching in between to support the on-the-job learning, giving them leadership inquiries. So it's really nice, because what happens is they get front-loaded with the content, right? So then we have them learn the content. When they come to the webinars, right, they're in breakout rooms, they are sharing, they're constructing their own learning, so that they're not just learning content kind of, in a static way, but it's really dynamic. It starts changing for them, and they're building, and it's differentiated, because people come with all different experiences, right? Why not harness on the diversity that we get from this group, right? So that was really interesting. And also just being part of a wider community is really fun, to be talking to somebody in Abu Dhabi when you're in Malaysia, for example. We have, it has to be zoned too, right? We can't have midnight meetings like myself, but that was really interesting. So in short, I just wanted to say that in the short year and a half, and I joined ISP 1 year ago, we have really transformed our centrally offered programs to a more dynamic, interactive, extended, supported kind of learning. And hopefully this is something that our teachers feel that they're developing. And when they're developing, they want to stay. So I do feel that CPD play a big role in keeping our talent, right? And not only just that, but having them meet other people from our other schools. It provides them pathways, because maybe they want to work in now Europe, because we have schools in Spain. They've met colleagues there. So those are the big approaches. The many, I can spend all day. As you can see, I'm so passionate about this. I prefer to just answer question at the end of the meeting as to as opposed to continuously talking.
Oh, it's wonderful, and you've actually it's really nice to hear of that community approach as well. But you've set me up very nicely actually, because I wanted to bring Siobhan into the question next, and you've given me a wonderful segue really into that aspect of online digital learning, which is clearly something you're doing with the Learning Hub. So Siobhan, in the report, you shared advice about the use of online teacher professional development. What would you say, coming from your background, what should schools be aware of when looking at online CPD? And can you share any advice on how to ensure it's effective?
Absolutely, it's my absolute passion, this area, so very happy to talk about it. I was privileged to be handing in my thesis and doing my viva on online teacher professional development just in the middle of pandemic, when people were saying, well, how did you know? And I was, I didn't know this was coming, but it's been a real privilege actually studying this area when it's absolutely so timely. I would concur with so many things that have been said already. In terms of how to ensure CPD is effective, it's a really difficult issue, because whilst everyone believes that CPD for teachers is a good idea, it's really hard to find someone that would think that's not a good idea. But actually, the research on what the impact of CPD is on what must be our final goal, which is on student outcomes, is actually very difficult. And identifying what CPD has actually led to a change in a teacher's behaviour in the classroom and then to a student's learning, that line of causation is actually very hard to monitor. But it's becoming far more of interest as the research is moving on, and the importance of the mechanisms. What actually changes the teacher? What then do they change in the classroom? What do they then change for the student? And then what ultimately does the student do differently that's improved? Is becoming studied to really work out what's in that black box between a teacher's CPD and a student's outcome being improved. So the question of how to ensure it's effective, my research was looking at almost like a Venn diagram. There's a huge body of research on teacher CPD and what's effective. The most recent report that I'm sure many people will be aware of, it's just come out in the UK from the Education Endowment Foundation. And whilst how it's presenting it is slightly different, actually the themes are exactly the same as everyone will be familiar with. They've put them into 4 chunks. They've said effective teacher professional development of any kind builds knowledge. Fundamentally, it motivates teachers, it develops teaching techniques, and it embeds practice in the classroom. And so again, I don't think anyone with experience in schools would doubt that. So that's any CPD. But the research on online professional development talks about things like teachers, or anyone, sorry, needing to feel social presence, needing to feel engaged in communities of practice, as Marianne has talked about, of cognitive presence is the phrase in the model, actually feeling like you're learning something and being challenged. That's why you keep going on with it. You want to learn more. Teachers are avid learners. That's why they've gone into the profession. They're inspired by learning their own and others. Tutoring presence online, people want to feel that there's someone more knowledgeable than them who's designed this course and they've got something to learn from them. So the impact of tutoring and good quality information online presented well, and learner presence. You actually have to be quite motivated to learn online. It can be quite lonely. It can be something that, as Marianne said, teachers are really busy. They actually need to be motivated to go and do it. But when you put those 2 things together, what's good CPD and what's good online learning, that center in the middle is what we're really interested in online teacher professional development. And my top tips for anyone looking at online learning would be look at sustained learning, which is actually motivating for teachers, takes place over time and uses experience through inquiry-based learning. So teachers looking at their own practice, the practice of others, trying things out and coming back. But the swift answer, that was a lengthy answer, the swift answer is, what is going to make it effective is look at the pedagogy, look at the mechanisms that a course is designed by, to see, is it actually fulfilling that for a teacher?
Thank you. That's it's really helpful, and some really good tips there for people who are looking at that for their own schools. For anybody listening live today, I'd like to just highlight that you can use the chat box for any questions you might have for our panel, and we'll do our very best to get to those during today's session. Pauline, if I can come back to you. We've touched earlier on how CPD can impact recruitment. Would you agree it has an increasing importance? And what advice would you offer to international school leaders planning their recruitment and retention strategies at this time? What's key to know this year?
Yeah, I certainly agree that professional development has always been a key component in securing the best talent. And I think this is one of the reasons it's mandatory for schools as part of their accreditation programs as well. I think we've got to look at ways of hiring and retaining that like never before. And some ideas that heads of schools could be thinking about is, absolutely assessing teachers over the last couple of years and the development that they've gone through the pandemic. What skills and attributes have they acquired? And rather than looking at a CV saying somebody doesn't have something, I would be asking them to look at what do they have, and the gaps that heads of schools may identify. What CPD could be offered as part of the hiring strategy to those teachers. And so teaching them before they actually come into post, offering those, CPD on those areas of development. And it was mentioned earlier how important community is. This could also be a way where heads of schools bring their new hires together prior to the traditional induction week in school, but actually bring these cohorts together once they've been hired to actually follow PD together and build that community and that sense of collegiality as well. Again, we talked about the whole year-round recruitment strategies. We would suggest, and we added to our iFair recently something we called chat days, and it was really just to bring community, teachers and leaders together just to chat and make connections, not necessarily with only the purpose of hiring, but really just making international connections and understanding, particularly for those teachers who may not have gone abroad yet and worked abroad yet, to actually get a sense from international leaders of what that entails these days. And then for them to have advice on what they need to do to go abroad. We learned from some teachers just recently that they have actually been supporting international schools from their home base, and they never actually traveled to country. So again, they've been opened up to learning about what international skills, if you like, that they need to acquire before they can go abroad. Professional development in the time of pandemic has really opened up opportunities for everyone in school, hasn't it? We've seen teacher assistants be able to follow professional development where they may not have had that opportunity before, to travel internationally to conferences. So I think we've just seen an increase, and that's what we must continue to do as part of our recruitment and retention strategies, is to have our whole communities learning together, and making sure that we retain teachers by offering them the development that they need. One last point I'd add to this is we've seen some schools offer the travel allowance that everybody would have received as expat teachers, returning home. They didn't use that during the pandemic, and we've seen some schools offer that as professional learning rewards as well. And we've seen a lot of people start, doctorates or masters as a result of that. So it's just an extra bonus, if I may say, to retain teachers as well. I hope that answers a little bit of the things that we're thinking about and seeing.
Absolutely. No, that's fantastic. Thank you. I'm going to move on, Marianne, to just ask you a little bit about retention rather than recruitment, in terms of how impactful CPD is on your retention, but also what other strategies, what other things help you retain teachers at your schools around the world?
I would say that one thing that we're focusing on right now is really on our teachers, helping them learn professionally. So if you look at Vivian Robinson's research, right, there are 5 dimensions to student-centered leadership. One was establishing goals and expectations. The other one was resourcing strategically, and then ensuring quality teachers, leading teacher learning. I want to just pause a little bit. And then finally, ensuring the safety and orderly of the schools. Now, these are the 5 dimensions. Now, interestingly, of all of the 5 leadership activities, the number one, the highest impact on student achievement is leading teacher learning. So hence we're focusing on that. And what do we do as a big group? We focus on leadership development. So hence we've developed senior leadership for learning courses program, which is extended, middle leadership. This is so that our teachers are feeling supported. Right. So this is an important motivational factor. And you and I know in any companies or in anything, when the teacher is or the employee is learning and growing, they're likely to stay. Also, you're creating a pipeline or a pathway. So for movement as well. So that's one strategy. But the other thing is also important to have an effective appraisal system, because it's like a performance management. It's for reflection, it's for how we do it, how we approach it. We're really promoting self-evaluation because this is empowering, right? So we're not making judgment. And when you evaluate them, you're capping where they can grow. You're telling them these things, how good they are. But when they're leading their own learning, it's amazing. There's no limit, right? So they're doing that. And then they're leading the learning of others. So you can see how we are doing it like a system. So the leaders are supporting the middle leaders, and the middle leaders are supporting their team of teachers. So everybody is learning and growing at the same time. That's a great environment to be. So that's one other strategy. The other thing is, because we are a group of 56 schools, so then also opportunities to, like I mentioned earlier, to be able to move. Now, that's not happening a lot because moving countries is a big change, especially now during the pandemic, but just knowing the pathway, the possibilities, right? And that is also one way of keeping our talent amongst ourselves. And that leadership development, because we do have aspiring leaders. So we have a lot of programs for aspiring leaders, aspiring middle leaders, anybody who wants to learn anything, on the Learning Hub, bite-sized, small online, proper courses, masters, if they want to do that. And also like a full program, extended, if you want coaching on the job learning. So really focusing on the development part of all our colleagues, I guess.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you. It's really interesting to hear the different things that you're doing. Now, Vincent, Marianne there has talked about some, formal steps that they've got in place, courses, various things that they do to support their staff. But whilst those are valuable, in the report, you talk about the value of not waiting for the sage on the stage. I love that phrase. And really instead sharing learning between staff at every opportunity, no matter the level of expertise. Can you tell us a little bit more about how you practice this at school? And do you have any advice for international schools developing their own structures at the moment?
Thanks for that, Nalini. Absolutely. I really connect with what Marianne said about a culture of learning in schools. The phrase lifelong learning, I'm a lifelong learner. I hear that all the time. Many teachers say it, but when I ask them, what are you learning then? Their response is very often, when are you sending me on a workshop next? And I was just thinking to myself, like that's not called learning at all. If you're going to be a lifelong learner, you've got a project always going on, and you don't only need a workshop to learn things. You don't need somebody else to teach you things. In the IB, we try and encourage our kids not to wait for the sage on the stage, or for the teacher not to become the sage on the stage, but rather to help the children discover learning, unpack their own learning. So if our teachers are walking around with this mindset of waiting for somebody, another sage, to go and teach them, then it's pretty automatic that it's going to transfer down. It's going to cascade down to the kids. Unfortunately, a lot of teachers are really obsessed with the pursuit of career-enhancing certificates, and this really develops kind of a passive mindset. Now, what we recognize in this is the best way to learn is to teach. I mean, I can't remember, there was a nice diagram I saw before about what are the best ways to learn. You can listen, you can see things, you can talk about it, but the best way to learn, the retention is highest when you teach somebody else. So all of our teachers are encouraged during CPDs to take up topics and then facilitate the collaborative learning process. Yet you don't need to be a master in inquiry to run a sort of a learning session about inquiry. You don't need it. Because we provide certain materials to make sure you don't go too far off the rails. But of course, when there's some special topics where talent is really, really lacking, we'll have to bring in some external. So there is a safety net in here. So for example, sometimes at one point, we really needed to learn about concept-based teaching and learning at the start of this concept-based teaching and learning introduction to the IB. So we sent 4 of our teachers to Lynn Erickson to become master trainers, and then they brought that information back and they train all of our teachers at the same time. We emphasize that you don't have to be a master to be able to help someone else grow, and that we are all responsible for each other's growth. Now, this practice developed a self-empowered mindset where we don't wait for that sage to appear on the stage before, as a team, we can co-construct that learning. So yeah, I really hope that helps. It is a little bit of a journey to get your teachers to really come on board with that. But if you're serious about it, and I think role modeling of the leaders, always saying, what am I learning? There we go. And I'm going to teach whatever I've learned, even though I may not be a master, I still know a little bit more and I can still share that with you right now. And role modeling that amongst leadership is a really nice way to get it started in the learning, the CPD environment.
Yeah, it certainly sounds like it. And I can imagine it really gives people that confidence boost as well in their own knowledge, and also just in terms of professional development with, you know, general skills, helping their fellow colleagues. Pauline, we all know that the international schools sector is facing a variety of challenges relating to future staffing and recruitment. There have been lots of reports over the past few years about shortages of teachers and that type of thing. How can international schools respond to this challenge? And what are the opportunities there, rather than necessarily just looking at the challenges? How can we turn those challenges into opportunities?
Many of my colleagues have mentioned some of the things we can be doing and are doing currently. I think it's important to continue to develop talent from within. I think that is the thing that has become most apparent during the pandemic, and not to be relying on expat teachers coming in and transitions in and out of country that we may have seen in the past. So I think professional development, yes, identifying the needs within our school and developing the talents from within. I think that is the main thing that I can advise at this point. I think the emerging opportunities are to look at how can schools develop their own brand in terms of their teachers and their learning. So what does that mean? It used to be that teachers would travel around the world to those schools that were high on everyone's list, you know, their hit list, you know, oh, it's wonderful to work at that school, where I think now every school has the opportunity to be that learning hub for everyone within the community. There are opportunities to consider teachers coming fresh out of university and out of teaching college. And looking at those programs, you know, how do we influence those programs to make sure that they address the themes, the pedagogy we need in international schools? How do we help universities see that as well? You know, I think one of the questions came up in the chat there is, you know, how do we do an international preparation for teachers? And I think certainly something that comes up time and time again is, and Vincent mentioned this, you know, the IB experience, or the British National Curriculum experience, or the AP experience. I think doing a crosswalk of how these pedagogies link with each other and what are the gaps, and how do we identify helping teachers fill those gaps through professional development as well.
That's great. You've touched on, as you said, there's been some questions in the panel, and I will come to these towards the end of the session, but I think there's something that really connects with what you said there in terms of opportunities. A couple of people have mentioned that a recent COBIS report put CPD a little bit further down the list in terms of what motivates teachers coming into the international sector for the first time. So not existing international teachers, but those who are looking for their first step into the world of international schools. Things like, salary, you talked about health benefits, etc., becoming more important this year. What are the other things that you've, from your personal experience, found new teachers to the international sector are looking for? And in an expansion to your earlier point, what can schools do to really highlight what they're offering to attract those teachers?
I think it depends as well. Where are you in your new teachers can be depending, on your age. Where are you in your life? Your considerations are different. Whether a lot of new teachers want to go off and explore the world, they saw teaching as a way to travel and to experience new cultural contexts. If you're moving a family, it's a different consideration, even though you might be a new teacher. So I would think about, how do we make our school communities welcoming in the first place for new teachers? How do we make it safe? How do we also address diversity, equity, inclusion with all teachers coming into our schools? I think schools are doing a lot of work around looking at themselves closely to see how they a community that really welcomes everyone. And I think we have to continue to look at that in our practices around DEIJ, and also in terms of child safety. I think attracting new teachers is teaching them what it means to be an international teacher. I often say, you'll never work as hard in your life as an international teacher, but the rewards go far beyond, the connections you will make, the friends you'll make for life. These are all, I think, attributes to international teaching that we maybe need to be more explicit about. Your community, your school's community becomes your family away from home, and you do have those wonderful opportunities to develop your professional career, to build on the skills that you have, and to really look at what is your area of expertise and how can you develop that more. So I think focusing, particularly new teachers, focusing on those attributes of international schools, more experienced teachers continuing to make sure that they do have those professional development opportunities, but in something that they care about, that they'd like to do. And that might be a shift in school, not particularly doing what they've always done, but it might actually be a shift of an interest or an area in school that they've learned that they'd like to know more of, and our leaders being more open to help them make that transition potentially to a different area in school.
Thank you. Thanks. That's really, really useful. Siobhan, I'd like to bring you back into the conversation with a little bit of a question about, I suppose, just the development, the accessibility of online. I'm going to ask you about CPD, and then I'm going to open it to the others in a minute about recruitment as well. But if I can ask you first, does the increased development and accessibility of online CPD help address some of these recruitment challenges and opportunities that Pauline's talked about?
Without a doubt, good online CPD has the ability to take people all around the world while studying in their slippers at home, wherever home is. Good online learning can motivate, it can, transcend cultures, it can make those connections, and it absolutely can support individuals. As Vincent said, the expectations of people who you're recruiting as an international school can be really high. People can access learning from anywhere around the world, whether it's qualifications or incidental learning. And so in terms of what international schools can expect, that literally the world is the oyster for a teacher looking for qualifications from anywhere. So I think absolutely, in terms of schools understanding that teachers who are learning are likely to be the best catch for them in their international school recruitment. But equally, as Pauline has said, that really resonated. Upskilling existing staff through online CPD becomes so much easier. The global networks of people developing courses, the global networks of qualifications that you can access, within Real Training. Our work is about developing UK qualifications and making them appropriate for international teachers, and making things relevant, appropriate, and not just giving people the same old because it was relevant in one country, but actually looking to see what the differences are as well as what the similarities and what teachers in international schools need. So absolutely, online teacher CPD, as long as it's got good pedagogy, as long as it's got a good fundamental underpinning of what the mechanisms are that the online learning is meant to be doing. It's not just a set of PowerPoints that you can access through a portal. It's actually about thinking about the learning experience and the learning journey. Absolutely, it can be support international schools and international teachers in those challenges and opportunities.
That's a really interesting point, and somebody's raised a question that I think connects with that slightly, and I don't know how much experience you've got here, but let me put to you, we're talking a lot about international schools and international teachers, but a lot of international schools also have a significant proportion of local teachers, and we're seeing that increasing with legislation and regulation around the world as well, of things like Saudiization in Saudi Arabia, and a mandated number of local teachers. Different and significant pedagogical challenges there when you're talking about people who are coming into international schools without necessarily having the same education background. How can that online CPD essentially help those teachers as well? Are there specific things that schools can be looking out for? Are there specific methods of delivery that can help those schools and those teachers?
Well, my own experience within Real Training is that we develop courses at different levels. So using the QAA framework, we for highly qualified, highly experienced teachers, master's level qualifications. So actually it's challenging them, it's giving them a bit of knowledge and then a bit of information, challenging their current knowledge and their current practice, and saying, go and do something with that and make something out of it, rather than just giving information. But as you move down the qualifications framework at level 4 and 5, actually that's far more about giving information, giving examples, giving case studies, and allowing people to see how other people have used this information. So I think the qualifications framework is actually very helpful in terms of what level is a course at, and fundamentally that affects the pedagogy of a course. If you're working at level 7 at master's level, it's about inquiry, it's about challenge, it's about using networks and looking for new information and new insights. If you're actually at level 4, 5, it's about, here is some information, here is how other people have used it, how could you use this, have a think with others and be supported in that. So I think absolutely it can work at any level. It's just making sure it's the right pedagogy for the teachers you're aiming it for.
Right. So it's suitable for all. You've just got to personalize it as such to the
Choose
learner.
the right online learning.
Yeah, I think that's a really, really important point. I'm conscious of time and the fact that I'm not even keeping up with questions in the chat. One question that's been raised by a couple of people, I think, Pauline, probably for you initially, is in terms of sorry, scrolling through desperately to find it. There are a couple of face-to-face recruitment fairs. That's a really interesting one, isn't it? Because just like CPD, recruitment has, as you mentioned yourself, had to move online in the last 2 years. What is the future for face-to-face recruitment fairs? Are we going to see more of a blended model in the future? Essentially, just what are your thoughts here?
I think we will. There has been a blended model for many years. ISS actually started the first iFair, I think 6 years ago, if I'm not correct, maybe 5 years ago. But we started to go online. We saw the trend way back when. And then we also have those who just really prefer in-person fairs. So I think you're right, Nalini, we will see a blend. From ISS, our schools have said we can't wait to get back to face-to-face fairs as well, and we will actually continue to do that. But as you say, a blended model, and I think it's it's important for recruitment fairs to move with the times as well. How can we look at ways of making this a learning experience for everyone coming to a recruitment fair as well. The trends have been to offer some professional learning for heads of schools, for instance, coming to recruitment fairs so that they're upskilling themselves and while they're recruiting. And I think we'll continue to do that. And potentially that's a way to offer our professional development at ISS. We've done a lot of sessions at our recruitment fairs as well. So I think a blended model. I do believe face-to-face will come back, and that's certainly something that we're planning for.
Fantastic, thank you. Vincent, I'm going to come to you with a question that I think you've just answered briefly in the chat, but I think it's such a valuable point because I think a lot of people will be facing this. So I'd love you just to expand on it a little, if you could, with us today. The question was about, you said not limiting determinants for hiring to qualifications, so IB certificates or experience, but instead training your own. And Keisha asks, have you noticed key dispositions or mindsets that appear to be positively correlated with effectiveness of teachers and in turn student achievement? Would you mind just sharing the answer that you shared in the chat there with us, please?
Sure thing. I remember reading a really interesting book, First Break All the Rules. If you haven't read it, it's a really interesting book that just tore my head apart. And one of the key things that I took away from the book is when people come to you, don't try and fix them. They come with your attitudes, their dispositions. There's nothing that you can do to change that. You can't take an unmotivated person and turn them around to be this super motivated person. If they're lacking in knowledge and technique, sure, you can give them that. But if they're lacking in that attitude, you can't do anything about that. Just so when you hire, the one thing that you're looking for isn't going to be technique and skills. Yes, okay, you get the baseline out of the way, but you're really looking for good attitude. Now, for me, it's a bit of a pet project because I was formerly a psychiatrist. So I'm always looking for what value do people hold. I'm always like, I've got a little notebook where I write down some profiles of teachers and which ones have been successful. And the one thing I've noticed is the moment I find a recruit or a teacher that is hungry, they are almost always likely to be successful beyond all of the other factors. If they're just hungry, they just want to try more, do more, be more. Hunger. I can't explain any more than that, but hungry people always win. They may fail a lot, they try a lot, they fumble a lot, but I love watching these guys because they're so inspiring and they inspire everyone else around them to be hungry and achieve more as well. Yeah, I love hungry people.
That's wonderful. Thank you. Marianne, if I can come to you for a second with your group hat on. ISP have 56 schools all over the world. There are obviously lots of different cultural considerations there. And we've had a really interesting question in the chat. We talked about pedagogy for local teachers, but also just in terms of different schools, management and cultural styles. The question is, what can you do to guide your international teachers and local teachers to navigate through essentially different cultures, management, but still, I suppose, have this homogenous approach that reflects ISP as a whole? Is there anything particular that you do to train your teachers here?
I don't think it's training for something like this because you're talking about a culture, right? So It's about really opportunities to be interacting with different cultures, right? And in terms of CPD, we train our trainers. So all our programs, we have external trainers. And a lot of things that we talk about are thinking about the different diversity in our classroom, our virtual classroom, understanding that, even thinking about who's comfortable to be, talking verbally, who's not. So really just focusing on creating an inclusive environment. Now, it's a very difficult thing to say, these are the things we do, because you and I know in terms of inclusive pedagogy, it's not about what you do, it's about knowing your learners. So the most important thing in any cohorts that we run or any PD is understanding your learners, that, their learning, not learning styles, but what would engage them, right? Removing barriers to learning, I think that's more important. So I would say if you have to use one approach, it's really thinking about okay, I have my learners and now I know my program. What are the factors affecting their learning? Let's remove that because they're not all the same. Right. I know that I'm not giving a specific answer, do this, because
no, that's fine.
The truth is there's none, right?
It's personalization, absolutely. Yes, no,
and it's about knowing and understanding, you know, the learning, the diversity, and focusing on harnessing the benefits of diversity.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. We're coming towards the end of today's session. I know I haven't got through all of the questions in the chat box. What we will do is we'll look at all of those post session, and I'll ask the relevant people to come back to you with answers. And of course, please feel free to connect with any of us on LinkedIn or via email. As we come to the end, I'd like to ask each of you joining me today, just to leave everyone listening with one key piece of advice. We've had lots of advice throughout the whole session today, but what is your one key piece of advice on international school recruitment or CPD, whether that's to do with strategy, planning, practice, providers, or indeed something else? Vincent, could I come to you first? What is your one key piece of advice for our listeners today?
It would be to map your talent before you start on any CPD strategy. You need to know what's on the ground, what do you need, who has what, before you begin the process. I've seen a lot of initiatives where people say, oh, Inquire is a great idea, let's go and do it. Or this pedagogy is a great idea. Oh, we need more classroom management. But nobody really knew what the ground really needed or wanted to hear. So if you don't map that and have a clear idea about what you really need, you're going to be floundering around. And use your external talent, use the external providers wisely. Like, don't bring them in to do something that you could do, because essentially what you're really saying is, guys, you're not good enough, so I have to bring in somebody else to go and teach you guys. And that's not sending the right message. You want to really bring in the external talent to bring in fresh ideas that you really didn't have talent for, and that's super effective. Have that plan to build internal capacity sustainably. I remember reading about this, a really great company in the Midwest that had a janitor rise through the company over a period of 18 years, and he became the CEO. And I really love organizations like that. And I really wish schools would be like that, where the janitor has every opportunity to train in the school and become the principal. Be that organization, grow your teachers. That's my advice.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Marianne, can I come to you next? What's your one piece of advice?
Well, I would have to say, and this applies to everyone, school leaders, teachers, focus on your own learning and the learning of others. Because if everybody's learning, then it's a great atmosphere to work in, isn't it? And you're creating a collective, intelligent organization, making you an adaptable organization. That's one. Can I just bring one more as well?
Of course you can.
I do think, anyway, you know what? I know time is right. I'm not going to do that. And but
no, you're okay. You've got 1 minute if you'd like to.
No, it's okay. It's okay.
Okay, we'll leave that for a teaser for the next webinar. Siobhan, let me ask you for your one piece of advice, please. Oh, Siobhan, you're on mute still.
My apologies. I would also concur that learning culture and being seen to be a learner at all levels of the organisation is fundamental. And my passion would be to highlight that, just as everyone would be very happy to accept that not all schools are the same, not all online learning is the same as well. And, you know, be critical, be thoughtful, and, you know, review it, you know, and underpick the mechanisms that it's trying to work towards, as Vincent said. And yeah, enjoy.
Wonderful. Thank you. And Pauline, one piece of advice for our listeners today on recruitment or CPD.
Very difficult just to give one piece.
I know.
I think as we seek to increase our talent pools for our schools, we can only do this by opening up the pool for everyone and to being more inclusive. And I think the only way we can do that is if we each continue to develop our own cultural competence and to develop the cultural competence culture within our school. We see a lot of work being done over the last years in this context, but it's still lacking. And I think the more we can do to increase everyone's understanding that together we achieve better results, going about it in our own individual and wonderful ways, and that no one culture should define how things are done. Yeah. I think we might get much more alignment in schools between national hires and international hires, and I think we might take away some of the tension we experience currently still. And I think the cultural competence piece starts with our own learning, and there are many tools out there to do so. I know that a lot of school leaders and association leaders have used the IDI tool to help their schools get a grip of where are they in their own cultural competence context. And that also offers an opportunity for future learning in terms of, okay, what are the things we need to address to ensure that we are hiring for inclusive practices as well.
Yeah, really, really important one. Thank you, Pauline. I'm going to have to wrap it up there, I'm afraid. We're out of time. Thank you everyone for your kind comments coming up in the chat. If anybody hasn't had a chance to look at the chat, there's some really good links that our listeners have posted there as well to various resources. So do have a look at that. As I said, any questions we haven't answered, we'll try to get back to you individually there. I'd like to extend my thanks to all of our panelists today for sharing your expertise so generously. It's been a great conversation. And thanks, of course, to ISS for sponsoring both the report and today's webinar. If today's discussion has sparked your interest and you'd like to read more about our research findings, then do have a look at the ISC Research website. It's iscresearch.com, and you'll find access to the report there. Just click on the Intelligence tab. So thank you very much for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you again soon. Thank you.
For more information about Heads Up, including access to previous episodes, please visit iscforschools.com/headsup. Until next time.